Well, welcome everyone. So this is one of the first sessions of Java 1 this week. So this is a talk on building Java EE 6 applications in Eclipse. And then we'll also look at how we can build them in a way that they're portable across different application servers. So this is going to be kind of a demo-driven talk. So we'll start off just by kind of reviewing some of the changes that happened in Java EE 6. EE 6 has been out for a little while now. We're starting to get some previews as to what's going to be in EE 7 actually. But we'll talk about what was new in EE 6 or what is new in EE 6. We'll do some demonstrations on building EE 6 applications in Eclipse. And then we'll look at ways that we can tune these applications to make them portable across different application servers. Things that we can do at the descriptors, things that we can do in our persistence file, things like that. Just a show of hands, how many Eclipse users are in the room? Awesome. Okay. Makes sense. Eclipse is the most popular IDE right now, at least for Java development. How many people are already doing Java EE 6 development? So some. Any still doing EE 5? Okay. EJB 2.1? Okay, none. Okay, good. All right. So at the end, we'll stop. I'll wait around at the end for questions as well. So feel free to talk to me at the end. But one of the main things about EE 6 is they were really trying to make it more of a lightweight spec. What we saw, and this is in a number of different ways. One is bringing in this concept of profiles. And the first profile that they defined was the web profile. They've also gone through and removed a handful of the APIs that were kind of legacy. So these are things like, JAX-WS Web Services has been out for at least 2 releases of Java EE. So they finally are deprecating JAX RPC. So it's the old way of doing web services. EJB 2.1, which doesn't seem like anyone is doing in this room, is also being pruned, or has announced deprecation in Java EE 6. So you will no longer have to worry about container managed persistence and all those kinds of things. Entity beans, so EJB 2.1 entity beans are gone. JSR 88 has also been marked as deprecated for Java EE 6. So the idea was that they were just trying to kind of remove some of the bloat that they've been packing along for the last 2 or 3 releases of Java EE. And then as part of the web profile, one of the big enhancements is they're really trying to make Java EE 6 enable you to build applications which has a lot less code. What we find is that, at least in Java EE 5, if you're building kind of a standard tier application where you're creating a JPA entity to do your entity access, then you're creating an EJB, then if you're using Java server faces, you're creating a managed bean. There's a lot of, you're kind of copying the same code over and over again across layers. And so with EE 6, they've tried to simplify that or flatten it out, allowing you to reuse these components at the different layers. And so one of the things that makes that easier is the ability to do EJB development in a WAR. So traditionally, even if you're just doing a simple web application, your entities and your EJBs are in some kind of utility project or utility module within your EAR, and then your web application is in your WAR. But no longer in EE 6. You can do the whole thing in a web application. This makes it easier to do lighter deployments to lighter weight servers. And they've also made some of the descriptors more optional. In EE 5, we started to see a lot of configuration through annotation. And they've taken that step to another level by allowing you to do a lot more of your configuration of your applications through annotation. So you no longer necessarily need a web.xml. You can do things like you can configure servlets via annotation through @servlet. You actually don't even need a faces config, or things that you would normally put in faces config, like your managed beans annotation, or your managed beans, your navigation rules and cases, things like that can all be configured within your classes themselves through annotations. And then they've also added things like dependency injection. And so that was introduced through 2 new specs in Java EE 6. One is context and dependency injection, that's JSR 299. So that allows us to basically inject objects within our components and then use them in our view layer, in our expression language. They've also added bean validation. So what bean validation tries to do is, when they were looking at the way you're typically doing validation, you're probably writing code at the web layer to do validation on user inputs. You're probably doing some more logic to do validation, in your business logic or your EJB. You might even be writing more validation at your entity level. And so what they found is that you're doing a lot of duplication of code, and you're having to keep these validations in sync. And so what they did with bean validation is they're trying to give you a single API to do validation at the entity level. So at the last place where data goes before it makes its way to the database. And so this is done through annotations. You can define custom constraints in bean validation, and it's all done at the entity level. And so we also have in Java EE 6 some updates to the existing specs. So JSF was updated. The major enhancement around Java server faces is just out of interest. How many JSF users are there in this room? Oh, good, quite a few. So in JSF 1.0, JSF 1.2, you most likely were using Facelets, but Facelets was an external library. Now Facelets has been brought into JSF as part of JSF 2.0. So that will give you a very nice templating engine, and we'll show some demonstrations of that. Servlets were also updated. EJBs were also changed so that you can also, as I mentioned before, you can do EJB development in web apps. So let's take a look at some of this in action. So I'm using Eclipse Juno, and I have a few additional plugins installed. So I have the GlassFish server plugins installed so I can deploy to GlassFish. I also have WebLogic's plugins installed just so I can show you some of the portability between app servers. And so this is coming from some free plugins that we develop at Oracle called Enterprise Pack for Eclipse. So the pieces here is GlassFish. That's what I'm going to use for the first part of the demo, and then WebLogic I'll use for the second part. So I have GlassFish already configured. It's already running. I'm using Oracle database, just using the standard HR schema. So let's create a project just to get started here. So I'm going to create a new dynamic web project. So this is, we'll call it my employees. We'll target it to the GlassFish server, and then we'll modify our facets. So for those who aren't that familiar with facets, this is something that we develop in Eclipse to make it easier to configure your projects. It's based on a faceted framework. It's part of WebTools platform. What facets are nice for an Eclipse developer because it allows us to make changes to your project. You can do things like add additional jars to your class path. You can, through facets, you can add additional files, maybe configuration files, things like that. So I'm going to add a Java server faces facet. I'm going to add a JPA facet. So what this will do is it'll install, well, I guess we'll walk through the wizard, but it'll add the JPA persistence XML to my class path. It'll add my faces config files, as well as entries into WebXML. So I'm just going to use Eclipse link, and I'm going to assign this or connect it to my Oracle database. So WebXML is optional, but if I'm using JSF, I do need to declare the faces servlet, so I will need to actually put an entry into WebXML. And then we'll just go with the defaults here. So I'm just using some of Eclipse WTP's core tooling for JPA and for Java server faces. And so this will give me some additional enhancements. You'll see it as we're kind of building up our application. One of the things is it makes it easy to map a database to entities. I'll just review my database real quick. So anyone that's familiar with Oracle database probably knows the HR schema. So I'll bring that up just for those who aren't that familiar with it. So the HR schema gives me, an employees, and it gives me relationships between departments and jobs and locations. So it's just kind of a very simple HR schema. So I'm using just the standard data source explorer, just DTP from Eclipse. Some of the things we can do with DTP is you can create new tables, you can define your schemas. I can edit and load data. So for example, here, this countries, if I want to go and look at what the data is, I can review that, make edits to it, push changes. I can even generate DDLs from this to go and create the schema somewhere else in a different database. So it's pretty useful. And then I can also do querying. So if I wanted to, do a quick query, I can run it. So that kind of thing. So just basic database tooling. But let's take this and let's take one of these tables and let's map them. So we'll actually build something out of this. So I'm going to create an entity from this employees table. And so what we're using here is actually the DALI tools. This is part of Eclipse WTP, so this gives us a way to very easily map entities from tables, or the other way around. If we have an object model that we want to map to a database, we can kind of go from top down. We can also meet in the middle. So these wizards are pretty flexible. So by default, we observe Eclipse will introspect into the schema to look at the entity relationships. So if you have a complex schema, it will try and discern what the default relationships are in your schema, and then it will try and create entities that will mimic that schema. Now you can always edit those, modify them, create your own custom associations, create your own many-to-many relationships, all those kinds of things. But I'm just going to go with the defaults here. So we'll just put it in a default package. It's all fine. And then even if I wanted to go down to the point where I want to customize how the generated Java class maps to specific columns, I can do that through this wizard as well. And the wizard keeps its state. So if I have quite a few entities that I'm generating and I'm doing a lot of custom configuration of this wizard, the next time I launch it, it'll remember my settings. So it's nice if I had to, something changes and I need to go and regenerate. Makes it easy. So what I should get here is an employees. And so my employee this is my entity, so it's JPA 2.0. I can get some content assist because I have a live database connection. If I go and make a mistake, something like that, then I get instantly alerted that things are broken. You even get content assist when you're writing your named queries, things like that. Okay, so maybe what we'll do is we'll just do a quick test of this entity. So let's create a servlet. So we'll use some of the features of Servlet 3.0. So typically if I'm defining my servlet, I'll have to put some sort of entry in my web.xml. In this case, because I'm using Servlet 3.0, I'm going to just use my URL mapping and configure it through an annotation. Okay, so maybe we'll put some information here in doGet so it actually displays something. And I actually have a cheat sheet here. I don't want to have to write a ton of print line statements. And let's fix our imports. Okay, so we've got a basic servlet. So when working with the GlassFish, how many folks here are doing development with GlassFish? Okay. So one of the conveniences of the GlassFish server plugin is, and it sometimes is a convenience and sometimes it can be a little annoying, to be perfectly honest. But as you're doing your development, you can set it to automatically publish as your resources change. So as you're coding, then it's doing It's not doing real like fast swap, hot deployment, but it's it's reacting to state changes and then redeploying the application for you. So I have that set to as on. So as I'm making changes to configuration files or Java classes, I don't have to go and explicitly do a full deploy. So it's publishing, and then we should get a servlet come up on our own, and it didn't work. Let's try and rebuild. Let's try it again. Let's see, what did I do? Well, I have a servlet that does work, so let me just run that real quick so you can see what the results are. All right, well, that one's working. Let's try this again. Well, let's go on and actually, I'll try and fix this on the next part. Oh, okay. Thank you. All right, well, let's move on. We'll use this project. That's true. All right, we'll take a look at the next piece. All right, so I have an entity. So maybe I want to test it a little bit. So we'll go in and get an entity manager, and then we'll try and do a query and return some values. So we'll get our entity manager, and then we'll do a query. So we'll get our employee, and let's create our entity manager. We'll do a query. And we'll use JPQL. So we'll say return all of the employees, return all the rows from employee, basically. So we have our list, but we want and then we'll get one of the items. We'll get the first row. We need to cast this. All right, and so then we'll just go in and print out this employee's name. Where's this EMF coming from? So anyway, I have the same code here. We'll just run this again. Let's see if we can get it to work. So we get the employee name. Well, hopefully my experience with the demo gods will translate through to, or I will have taken all of the brunt of the demo gods' wrath, so that all future speakers in this room will be okay. All right, so we've got a servlet. I had some syntax errors, so it didn't quite work as well as I wanted it to. But basically what we did was we made a servlet. We didn't have to register it in a WebXML because we used the web service annotation. And then we just grabbed an entity manager and just returned back all of the employees and just printed one of the employee values. Let's create an EJB. Because probably not doing all of your development in Servlet, you're probably doing it in something more mature, like JSF or something like that. So we'll create an EJB in this class, which will do a similar type of functionality, basically do some kind of query, return a list, and then we'll use that in our facelets. So another of the new features or new aspects of Java EE 6 is the ability to develop EJBs in a web app. So I'm just in a war. So I'm going to create a new session bean. And so this is going to be a stateless session bean. We won't create any of the interfaces. This is another aspect of EE6. And so notice here we have stateless and local beans. So these are some of the annotations that will describe this as a EJB. So let's create a method to return the list of employees. And then we'll use this in our web in a web app or in some web pages to display this in a table. Just some more convenience methods. I need to get an entity manager. And then we're going to use this entity manager. Get these imports right. Let's return null for now, just so this thing stops barking at me. Okay. So you can see this is one of the drawbacks of having this like constant deployment of the GlassFish server plugin. So by default, it's set to on. Just double click on the server and set to never publish automatically or publish after a build event or something like that if it's, if you find it too annoying, if it's being too verbose. All right, so let's do this query again. So just like we did in the servlet, we'll create a query. And we'll use JVQL or JPQL. And we'll get the result list. All right, so this is basic EJB. It's in our web app, so let's actually use it in a page. So I'm going to use facelets for this example, and because I want to take advantage of some of the templating capabilities. So in Eclipse Juno, within the JSF Tools project, we added support for JSF 2.0 and facelets, and so if you're creating XHTML files, creating facelets files, you'll see we start to have some templates. We're starting to give you some content assist. And we also started to build some content assist around CDI. So these are some of the things that we've been doing within the JSF Tools project. So I'm going to create a new template. I'm going to create a new template file here. This is going to go in my WebInf. Because I don't want this template to be exposed to the outside world. So I'm just going to put the template in WebINF and then build all my content pages outside of it. So I'm going to be using XHTML pages, and then we can see here some of the templates that we're providing by default. So here we have a facelet template. We can see some of the code here. So it's going to create a header, a content area, and a footer. For those who aren't that familiar with templating in Eclipse, this is all editable. So if you wanted to define your additional templates, you just click the hyperlinks here for HTML templates. And then if you had your own custom headers or custom footers or some certain styles that you have to conform to, you can create them within Eclipse and then they'll show up in your new gallery. So it's pretty nice. It's basically how we define these types of facelets templates for WTP. So I'll create a template here, and then I'm going to override some of the files or some of the content here. So I'm going to create a header. Just call it employee list. And we'll keep the content blank because that's what we're going to override in our content pages. And then we'll provide a footer. No, we'll just say created in Eclipse, something like that. So we have our template. So let's create some content pages that will use this template. So once again, I'm going to go back and create a new page. Call this list. HTML. So we will create a new composition page, basically. And so what the composition page will allow us to do is import a template. So here I can go into this composition element. Maybe I'll get rid of the design view here. So from the composition element, I'll do a control space and I can start to get some content assist here. So I'll look in WebInf and I'll pull in my template.xhtml that I just created. So the way this is laid out, I have the header, the content, and the footer element defined. So these would override any existing elements that I've created in my template. But I actually want to use those elements from my template. So I'm going to remove header and just default to the template header. I'm going to remove footer, default to the template footer, and let's just run it. Let's see. Is it going to run? Let's see if it'll run. Yeah. So we see our header and our footer, and then just the default content message here. So let's actually use our EJB here. And then use that get employees method. So I'm going to be invoking, I'm going to be using CDI for that. So this is going to basically be injecting from my EJB into my page. And so in order to do that, I have to do a little bit additional configuration in my EJB. So one thing I have to do is add an @named annotation. This will enable this EJB to be used in my pages. So let me add that. And then the other configuration for CDI in E6 is you need a beans.xml file in your web-inf directory. And that could be an empty file. It's just one of the configuration requirements. So we'll create a beans.xml file as well. And it can be a 0 KB file, so I'm just going to delete it. Delete the contents. Okay. And then lastly, I guess what I should do also before I try and deploy anything and use this EJB is I'm going to change my transaction type. So by default, your JPA tools within Eclipse will always try and do a resource local. But in this case, because we're using EJB, we want to use JTA as our resource manager. And one of the nice things about the GlassFish tools in Eclipse is that you can actually browse without having to go to the admin console. You can look at you can pull up your resources. So I know here that I have one. I'd already created this ahead of time, but at least sometimes you may forget what the exact naming pattern was that you used. So that makes it easy. All right, so we have our EJB ready for injection. I've got everything, so I think we should be able to build this now. So let's create a data table, and we'll just pull in that list. Let's give it a border of 1. We'll give it a numerable. So there's a few different, obviously, many ways that you can develop your web pages. So one is through drag and drop. So in Eclipse, we have a few different editors for web pages. One is a JSP editor, which just gives you content assist and syntax highlighting. We also have what I'm using here is called the web page editor. I think by default, Eclipse will always give you the JSP editor, but if you wanted to see the web page editor, it's here. What the web page editor also allows you to do is it gives you some design views, so if you prefer to work more in a design way, you can. And then the other thing is it's synchronized with Eclipse's palette. So if you prefer to do kind of drag and drop to build your pages, you can use that. So that's a feature of the web page editor. And that's been around since Eclipse 3.4, I think, is when we created it. I think something like that, or maybe Eclipse 3.3. So it's been around for quite a while. So I'm going to add a JSF data table. And the reason that this shows up in my palette is that because I have all of the taglib declarations at the top of my page, then it knows to pull them in and display them in the palette for me. B.employees, call this E1. Okay, so I've got a data table. I'm going to pull in a reference to my EJB, to my getEmployees method, and I'm going to give it a variable of E1. And so now we'll just pull in values for each of these, populate the different columns. So I'll do one more drag and drop, and then we'll do the rest just by code. We'll do another column. And then we'll do one more column. Let's see, how does that look? Should be all right. Let's just double check my entity, make sure that I've got the names correctly. So it's first name, last name. All right, let's try to run this. And of course, so let's try this here. Well, let's take a look at the one that was working. What was the question? What was it? Oh, an output. Oh, well, yeah. The output text was just a test. I mean, I can do that here. We can just do an output text, but yeah, but it's not necessary. Yeah. Okay, well, let's try on this one that I have. It was working. Yeah, so that's the way it works. Okay, so what we've done is we've created an entity using JPA 2.0, created an EJB using the EJB 3.1 spec in a web app. Displayed that in a facelets page and binding through CDI. So that's kind of the different parts of this spec demo. So the tools we were using, as I mentioned before, was just some free Eclipse plugins from Oracle. So that's what gives us the GlassFish plugins, some of the JSF plugins, some of the Java EE 6 stuff. So it's enterprise pack for Eclipse if anyone is interested, especially for the GlassFish server plugin, as well as the JSF plugin. So let's talk about portability. So starting in both GlassFish 3.1 and WebLogic Server 12.1, they can now accept each other's deployment descriptors. So if I'm building an application that originally was designed for GlassFish, I can take this application and run it with some modifications. Not every descriptor element is supported, but many of them are. Run it directly in WebLogic and vice versa. So here's just some of the examples of the top level elements that are supported across both application servers. So if I am coming from GlassFish and going to WebLogic, if I have in my GlassFish web.xml or in my sunweb.xml, it basically gets translated over to a WebLogic.xml behind the scenes. And so security, EJB, some of my JSF configurations, the class loader, which would describe where I want my compiled classes to come from, all of these types of elements that I would set in GlassFish's version of WebXML will get carried over to WebLogic XML or to WebLogic without having to create the WebLogic descriptors. So I can take this application that I'm building against GlassFish and then just run it straight against WebLogic. And these slides will be shared afterwards, so you can get them. I also included a docs link to the full set of elements. So if you want to see exactly what is portable, you can get that. Conversely, if you're going in the other direction, so you originally developed an application against WebLogic and you're moving to GlassFish, well, you have the same set of elements in WebLogic XML and GlassFish Web XML, but WebLogic has many more descriptors, right? It has a WebLogic application XML, it has descriptors for your web services, for JMS, for your JDBC. GlassFish doesn't have associated descriptors for them, but basically what you end up doing is a lot of these things can be added to glassfish.xml, so you have a very large GlassFish descriptor. One thing I wanted to point out here, though, is that on the web services side, if I'm setting there are a handful of elements that exist in WebLogic configurations that don't have a companion configuration on the GlassFish side. So an example is here in web services where I can configure this via XML, but on the GlassFish side I would actually have to configure it in my class. So let's see an example of that. Let's see if this demo is going to work. Let's see. So I have the same project, and it's got WebLogic.xml in it. It's configured to run against WebLogic, so my targeted runtime is WebLogic 12.1.1. It just has some basic configuration, just the context root. So I copied over my Sunweb application.xml, and so I'm using some of the items that we had in this table. So, for example, the context root we're using, session config, class loader, all of those are in here. So I'm going to say class loader is going to we'll set it to false, meaning I'm not going to delegate to, or not prefer the classes that come out of WebInf classes. I'll provide a different context root since the name is employees2, and I'll keep my generated JSP files. So we're just going to delete WebLogic.xml, and then we'll deploy this to my running WebLogic server. So essentially what we have here is this same project. So it's the same. So we'll go in and we'll add employees2. And let's try running one of these pages. So it works just the same. So, just to reiterate, some new features that were introduced both in GlassFish 3.1 and in the WebLogic 12.1.1 timeframe. You can just take the same deployment descriptors and run them against the companion app server. So where do we go from here? Well, Java EE 7 was supposed to be announced this week. I don't think it actually was, but or at least the spec was supposed to be final this week. But there are sessions where they are giving previews of some of the changes in Java EE 7. One of the new things will be additional enhancements around the web profile, enhancements to enable HTML5 and JSON style kind of thin server development. If you want more information, I would check oracle.com/JavaEE. That'll get you some of the latest news on the Java EE changes and Java EE news. If you want to get Eclipse plugins for GlassFish that we were using today, it's just oracle.com/OEPE. And that's it. Thank you for coming.